Acknowledging your point that theoretically if we could redistribute food equally or enough to meet basic subsistence needs, we could feed everybody still. The question is, how long will that continue, that we theoretically have enough for everybody? And second of all, how do you make sure that everybody gets a basic subsistence amount? I don't think anybody's figured it out completely. What do you think from what you've learned?
Yeah. Why did rice be sent to India a few months ago and the people never got the rice?
I don't know about the specific example you're talking about.
Oh.
The complaints are that middlemen skim or steal and then sell it.
Well, listen, I mean, on the web, they have this corruption index, and I think Australia or certain countries have minimum amount. I can't say this for sure, but is corruption more prevalent in India and China than in the U.S.?
After the last Supreme Court decision on campaign finance reform, you're asking that?
But,
After a month where both major political parties had to raise over $111 million each in 1 month to be viable, we're going to criticize other systems for being corrupt.
well,
yeah, no, there is corruption. There's a lot of corruption in India. There's a lot of corruption in China. I would argue we have another brand of corruption that's been sanitized because the powers that be write the laws to make it okay, the kind of corruption that they practice. When you discuss campaign finance with any student at any level, and anybody can recognize in a few minutes this is corrupt. So yeah, there is corruption there. There's corruption here. It's just on a different scale, in a different way, executed in a different means, and made legal. Sorry for my quick take on it, but that's how I see it.
It's okay. No, he's perfectly perfect, because my question about the human factor in all these issues is very, very crucial. Nobody addresses it. But my question I wanted to ask is, why is it that the pyramid keeps getting drawn with the base below? Why couldn't it be turned around?
That's a great question. Why don't we invert the pyramid and put the world's poorest at the top?
Yeah.
What would that do mentally for you?
Well, for me, it's a way of saying that these are actually the people that are more important. I mean, you talk mostly about corporations and corporations, but I move a step away and say, listen, I'm thinking about the laws the U.S. government passed,
Yeah.
and the amount of force they have behind it through their embassies, their consulates, making sure that most of these third world countries don't really develop well enough to compete.
So that's a whole other view of the world, that the world is maintained the way it is by a neo-colonial first world structure.
It hasn't changed.
Yeah, yeah. I think that makes it all the more compelling, doesn't it, though, that there are some examples in India. I mean, the theme of today is we have these problems in the world that we all acknowledge. Here are some examples from India that are worth considering as maybe models to follow. If nothing else, models of thinking. I bring it back to that holistic approach rather than a compartmentalized. I'm not going to opine on what you raised because it's a perspective that you can find evidence for. And some people would say, no, it's not completely a valid perspective. But I think maybe you'd agree that doesn't that make it all the more compelling when you do have indigenous solutions within a country, even in a poor place that's been desertified, where the people are desperate, have figured out a solution that works. Maybe we ought to be learning something from it. Maybe there's something about the thinking that we can emulate. And that has nothing to do whether we're still sitting in a neo-colonial corrupt structure.
I agree. I agree.
I'd like to argue that I don't know if the argument is about corruption or as corruption that enhances your economic development. So in other words, I don't think corruption itself is bad because it makes movement of goods and services more efficient. Where does that corruption land? In other words, if I steal money from the government
Right.
and put that money back into my society,
Yeah.
then my society continues to develop. What we're talking about is corruption, where that money leaves that institution or that government and goes elsewhere. There are many people that steal money from their societies and put them in the Western world.
I'm not an
That
expert on
is terrible corruption.
I'm not an expert on corruption, neither the study nor the practice of it.
No, Master Professor, corruption does not improve the economy. It actually deteriorates it.
I thought there was a lot of consensus that it's an inefficiency. That if it costs that extra $30 when you go to the registry of motor vehicles to get my license, and that $30 is not an official fee,
No.
it's that person behind the window saying, yeah, it'll take 2 weeks, or you got to pay me a grease payment. That creates inefficiencies. But you know, I'm not going to opine about it because it's not my field. Maybe we should take an online comment or
Oh yeah, there's one
online comment.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
Says what can youth do to solve the present crises? What is the message for young people?
Okay, so I think if we were to again take themes from Indic thinking, see things holistically, fix yourself first. Fix yourself first, do you agree with that? Practice it. If you want to know what came from somebody who worked in the sustainable business world, his advice in your education is learn a lot of chemistry, biology, physics, and then get yourself a good mentor who can break down the barriers between all these fields and help you see things holistically. I can even look at you. You're looking at me, right? Person online? So think holistically would be a lesson of today and from Indic thinking. The advice from that person who advises companies on how to be more sustainable is learn your science, but learn how to break down the barriers that we've set up between the sciences. And the wisdom from probably every religious tradition, but especially as exemplified by Gandhi's life, merging all the wisdom traditions into his own example. Fix yourself, create happiness in yourself, take care of the people immediately around you, and simplify your life as well.
Thank you.
Okay, last question from here.
Where's the rest of the world in comparison to India's sustainability programs? Where's the rest of the world in the game?
Wow, great question. You've just given me something to do for the rest of the year. Well, if we look around the world, there's always these glimmers of hope, and then there's also a lot of data to just make you cry and throw up your hands and say, I'm going to Las Vegas, the world's going to hell anyways. That's not a constructive approach, but we've all been there, right? Desperation, I'm just going to do something self-destructive and forget about the state of the world. Where's the rest of the world? China supposedly is beating everybody in terms of investments in some renewable energy. Some of it is pretty evil. They've underpriced their solar panels to the point that they're dumping them on other markets, including ours, and driving companies out of business because they've dumped the product. They've set the price artificially low to drive us out of business. We've lost a company in New Bedford that was a fantastic example, flexible solar film that could be sewn into your clothing or into your backpack or laptop bag or put on windows to generate power. That company is now in bankruptcy. It's been underpriced. So the flip side of the great Chinese investment in renewable energy is part of their policy is dumping the product at below production cost, driving other companies out of business. So that's pretty sad. There's some great examples out of Europe in terms of renewable energy. Germany generates more solar power than we do, which is crazy. We have Arizona, they don't. How is that happening? Brazil was the first country to become energy independent. So that's kind of great. But then again, part of that is based on their exploiting their own oil and gas and building a giant hydroelectric project. So there's a great example from Africa that I love to bring up in class because it's another example of seeing things holistically, stopping and being a little bit humble and looking for solutions in unconventional places. Termite mounds. Why do termites build large towers?
They're cooler?
They cool when it's hot. The desert gets hot during the day. What happens to the desert at night? Gets cold. All right. What happens if I build a long, tall tower? Remember, termites are very tiny. Their towers are like this big. So to them, this is like, I don't know how many times taller, but much taller than the Dubai tower is to us. This is order of magnitude taller relative to the size of the being. Why would they invest so much effort in building such a giant tower, all these little termites? What happens to air when it gets heated up inside of that tower? Hot air rises. So if you open up holes in the top of the tower and open up vents at the bottom such that the air that rises has to be replaced, right? So it has to be sucked from the bottom. You can suck it underground, cool it down, and then it goes into your little termite nest. Consider that the termite brain thought of something that we didn't. Or at least we might have thought of it, but we forgot about it in the modern era when we decided to build these little toxic boxes and plug them into coal-burning power plants, right? They close up those same vents at night, and what happens to all the heat that you've stored, that you've been building up during the day? It keeps you warm at night. So there is a skyscraper, I sometimes doubt myself, but I always turn out to be right guessing. Mozambique, I believe, is the right country. Does anybody also know this example? I'm pretty sure it's Mozambique. If you Google termite mountain skyscraper, you'll find this. It's the only project I've heard of, and it's in Africa of all places. Not Sweden with their great image. Yes, Sweden's great. But you know, they have a great image as this green country, but hey, somebody in Africa beat them to the idea of a skyscraper that you don't have to have HVAC turned on. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Similar example I saw in Toronto, but they actually pump water from the Great Lakes. It's free air conditioning water, right? You don't need to turn on your air conditioning there either during the summer. So there's an example. Did I answer your question? Some examples from other parts of the world. I wouldn't say that India is a shining example overall 100%. I mean, look, it's overpopulated. Visit there. The air quality can be bad in these big population centers. Not all sanitation issues have been figured out everywhere. But just like we have problems and we also have shining examples that should be learned from, it's the same situation there. Whole host of problems. It's not a land of unicorns and rainbows. You know, I could have put pictures of the poverty and you'd be crying right now. But there are these examples that we should learn from.
What kind of plays off that? Like, I might not have all the facts on proper education on the topic, but if their sustainability efforts are continuing to succeed,
Yeah.
how is there a stigma that we're trying to break to want to follow them? Is there too much pride to want to follow what they're doing? Or is it we don't have the tools to follow what they're doing? What is it that's holding us back from following
That's a
the culture?
$1,000,000 question. $1,000,000 question. I need to correct one thing that I might have, a misapprehension I might have created. Again, I can't overemphasize, not the whole country is becoming this fantastic green role model that we should follow, right? You could ask the same question, why don't we replicate examples of success within our own country? $1,000,000 question, and there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. Yes, I think that what you mentioned could be a factor, that in general Americans, we're proud and we think we're the best, and I don't know how often we encourage students or people in business or in government to look outside the country for examples to emulate. Could be an issue. There could be an issue that we have established power structures. There's a lot of money to be made in the status quo. I mean, ask yourself, why are we still spending as much money as we did when we actually had the Soviet Union presenting an existential threat to us? I mean, you can make the argument, maybe not everybody would agree, but you can make the argument that we had to spend a lot of money to defend ourselves against the Soviet Union, which at times had behaved aggressively. But who are we defending ourselves now with hundreds of billions of dollars of money? The only answer is we're defending our own corporate interests that make a crap load of money from the defense industry as it is. Why do we not make a more aggressive push towards renewables? Anybody remember how much ExxonMobil made in 1 year? How much they made per second?
doubles the
I think they beat 40 billion in just outright profit per year. That's already old news from a few years ago. I have my students sometimes calculate that, what that works out to per second. I'm pretty confident it's at least over $1,400 per second. And remember, they have an equal right, as you do, to express their political views with donations. So, gee, why do we still have subsidies for the oil and gas industry? And why do people attack subsidies for solar? Maybe it has something to do with how much money is being made in some of these entrenched industries. I think has to be part of the answer. There could be other answers, though. It could be laziness, and it could be lack of initiative and hypocrisy on our own part. Look, full disclosure, so nobody else can call me a hypocrite later, either online or here. I traveled this summer. I had a carbon footprint. Did I adequately offset it? I don't think so. I mean, I like to think that I add some value with going to see examples like this, that I can take them back and maybe pollinate people's imaginations to maybe do constructive things in their life. But have I simplified my life adequately? I'm a hypocrite. I haven't simplified adequately. Am I going to give up my everything that I use right away, right now? I'd like to. But that's a pretty big challenge to actually change all of our practices adequately. And that's part of the problem also, right? So we need to internalize some of these lessons and really take them to heart. Even if we all did just half of what we know we could do, we could make some progress. So that's all. Inertia is also part of the issue, I think.
So, well, one American Vivekananda Academy students want to thank you because they were watching.
Oh, who? The American? What?
Vivekananda Academy, that's in New Hampshire.
Oh, wow.
And
Thank
they were
you.
watching you, so they wanted to thank you. The students were very happy.
Namaste.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I have a comment and question.
Okay.
So you did raise or brought up the issue of the chowpal, the village chowpal.
Right.
Well, there are a lot of practical issues, and I'm not sure whether familiar with it. The English, while you say that there are about, educated people can speak English and understand, but the village people cannot. So the internet need to be made in such a way that it's accessible to their language.
There's another point of view, and I think this is what's happened in practice from what I've read about it, that one of the unintentional side spin-offs is internet access for kids expands their horizons, opens up education opportunities, and from watching my own cousins in another country, if you're exposed to entertainment or information in English and it's only in English, you have to learn it. You're much more stimulated to learn it than if something is in your own language. I think it's a benefit because, like it or hate it, we need a common language around the planet. English has become that lingua franca, and it's probably a benefit for these kids that they have a motivation to learn what is the language of the rest of the world.
That will take 20 years, and that's the next generation.
Yeah.
You're talking about now, that especially when the things are moving.
That's interesting. I've never read about whether they had to adapt it for farmers that didn't speak English, that couldn't learn English. Maybe there's a few people in each village that managed to navigate.
Yeah, that may be another way. So the important thing is, I wanted to say that about 80% of India is still rural. And
Is it still
rural?
Rural.
Yeah.
That-
About 80% is still rural. So when recently there was a blackout, and it was on CNN saying that whatever 2/3 of the India is without power. It's ridiculous. When somebody asked me this question, because 80% of those people don't have power anyway.
They didn't know there was no power.
There was no power, and they were all like telling me, is your family okay? Well, my family is okay. They never have electricity,
Yeah.
so this is nothing new for them. I mean, there is electricity for a few hours in a day. You never know when you're going to get it. So, what I'm saying is that two points. One is that the sustainability contribution from these people is humongous to the world. We're not only talking about population. When they start using just like we are using everything. There is no way in the hell that people are going to be able to come up with whatever technology they're coming up with. So it is important that population learns to live like some of the examples that you gave, and the people like us, and you were saying carbon footprint for your travel, that we also learn to live something like, so that they don't try to emulate us, which is what is really happening in the villages.
That's
And the second thing is to how to create that kind of arrangement. I mean, Indian villages, I've read a little bit about history, so they didn't appear like that. They apparently were organized like that from ancient times. So the business practices, administration, the education, this is all, if you provide locally, and health. If you provide locally, then people will stay. But if you don't, then people move and they contribute to something like some dog millionaire, that kind of situation. So your comment on this?
You make a great point that it's funny because I've heard this phenomenon of urbanization described both as a positive and a negative. Generally, the trend around the world is for people to move to cities. And if I remember correctly, we've hit two big landmarks in the last year. One was that we hit 7 billion people. The other one was that a majority of us now live in cities or within greater city limits. Does anybody know for a fact on that one? Is it
Well, the China turned from 49 to 51% urban. That was the landmark.
All right, I thought it was the world as a whole now. More of us live in cities than live in rural areas. That's been labeled as a good thing from this perspective, that if we adopt sort of a modern lifestyle with technology and getting around slightly longer distances within what we consider our community, that if we're in a densely packed city using public transportation, that we actually have a lower environmental impact than if we were to all be spread out in suburbia would be the nightmare, or we're all commuting everywhere, right? So I've heard urbanization described as actually a benefit. The scary thing is you're right, if somebody leaves behind a simple, bucolic lifestyle without technology, breathing fresh air, raising their crops, to some people that might look like poverty and backward. Another person might look at the city as, oh, well, now your stress diseases are going to go up, you're going to be exposed to unhealthy air. If you're living in a population center in the slums, your sanitation is bad, maybe your security, fundamental security isn't guaranteed as well as if you're in your local community and in the rural areas. I think it's a huge question, also a little bit outside of my expertise. But I think those are the two arguments. That one is that if we adopt a modern lifestyle, it's better for us to live in densely packed cities than sprawl out. The other argument is maybe we should all go back to living in villages. Maybe we were happier, and maybe life was simpler and cleaner. That view has been expressed over the centuries, and it's never won. People tend to like modern conveniences, right?
I think about an advantage of having, let's say, solar energy. Instead of you storing the energy and creating other products that could be environmentally destructive, why not capture the power of the sun? Cool your refrigerator during the day, freeze everything. During the night, you don't need to inflate that particular power and use it the next day and capture another rays of sun. But in this way, we can also move to the village, maybe reduce our so-called wind power and make it smaller so we can generate our own power and in a way so we can move back to the rural area.
How many people in this room would right now, given the option of living in a city, being an accountant, a lawyer, yoga instructor, God knows what you want to do with your life, artist, how many people would rather live in a city or move out and live a simple life, no technology, raising crops, milking a goat, sewing your own clothing?
On the Cape?
Wait. On the Cape?
On the Cape.
Oh!
Yes. On the Cape, yes.
Wow, my mind immediately went to not the Cape.
There has to be caveats.
I think that's unfair.
Okay.
What you're saying is unfair. You're giving this comparison. What about what he's suggesting? In the villages, you have the technology,
But just
sustainable technology.
Exactly.
You can do the agriculture, which is modern. You can provide them internet so that they can do the marketing and business, rather than sitting in Boston and having a 1-2 hour commute.
how many people in this room are single? What are your chances of meeting your soulmate if we're spread out in villages?
Through internet.
Is it better to be in
Well,
you know about
Facebook.
I'm married for 34 years.
So you gotta look for dates somewhere. to
Yeah, but
spend,
that's
right?
modern. If you still go back in the villages and you still have the market square where people come to.
Everybody in the village is married. I can tell you, everybody who is of the age of marriage, both boys and girls, they are married.
So, so to go back to the question, if we change the question, you can have modern conveniences and live in a village versus modern conveniences but living in a city. How many will choose the city?
Which system?
How many will choose the village?
With sustainable-
With sustainable practice.